I actually did remember how much Bitcoin was on the drive. So I was like, I'll never be able to sleep again if I don't check. So I end up in my shed and find the box of hard drives. And long story short, about 8 months later, he says, yeah, if I fly out to Boulder, Colorado, he'd help me get it. And cut to about 3 weeks later, and in his basement with a team of 3 other people, one of which is Hunter Beast. So I have been using the Stripe method, or I'm sorry, the Mahler's method, which is basically living on credit cards and then paying off my credit cards with my Bitcoin stack. So I basically can live on the Bitcoin. Gavin Andresen, for whatever his issues are or were, he was, and probably still is, a brilliant engineer. And he was responsible for refactoring a lot of Satoshi's code. And so the fact that he, as Satoshi's hand-picked successor, who was responsible for refactoring a lot of this code, in 2014, the bankers could onboard $2 trillion. They could onboard the entire market cap of Bitcoin in 6 months into some CBDC if they wanted to. They've already got all the customers. They've got, control over the media channels. There's no existential threat to Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't going to collapse. It isn't going to go to zero. I think the trend line is pretty clear. Bitcoin is a great store of value. It's a global settlement layer.
All right, welcome to the Bitcoin broadcast. I'm your host, Vince. Today we have on Josh. Goes by Secure Sovereign on X. I was introduced to you on X, and I'm pretty excited to hear this story because you don't hear of very many people buying Bitcoin back in the day, especially like 2010, and being able to recover it. But how are you doing today, man?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Do you want to start with your Bitcoin story? I think people are going to love to hear about this one. And we've all heard the guy who lost his little thumb drive in the trash or whatever, and he spent like 3 years looking for it because it was a life-changing amount of Bitcoin. But you actually did end up recovering some Bitcoin from back then. So I'm going to hand it to you because I want to hear about this story, and then we will go from there.
Sure. So the long and short of it is, and I've told this many times, I'm a nerd. That's really what it boils down to. I was a technologist in my late teens and early 20s, learning about programming, web development, and I knew PHP and JavaScript and MySQL and all these technologies that you need to do application development on the web. But I didn't know about Linux, and most of the servers back then were deployed on Linux, and that's still true today. So I figured, in order to claim that I'm a full stack web developer, I need to understand the full stack, and Linux is part of that stack. So I get a little computer, I install Ubuntu on it, and get a little web server going and a little website, and very quickly run out of things to do because there's not much to do on Linux. There's no, at least back then, there's no games, it's command line. It's very boring. So I did a Google search. Like I said, I'm in my early 20s. Pizza Day had just happened. And the Google search was, what do I do with my Linux? Incidentally, one of the first results that comes up is, well, you could put Bitcoin on your Linux. And I'll point out, and I have pointed out before, that there are a lot of things that could come up to that query. What can I do with my Linux that are not Bitcoin, especially back in 2010 when basically nobody knows about it. It's a nascent project. Laszlo and his, pizza buying spree over the course of 3 or 4 months was saturating the search results, saturating the news, and that's why it came up in that search. And I'm just a curious technologist, and I just think, okay, I'll just do some Bitcoin with my Linux. And I didn't really think much of it. I knew that it was a unique value proposition because it was the first digital asset that could not be copied, only transferred. And I understood that part of it. I thought that was kind of cool, but as far as liberating us from fiat and the Federal Reserve and the USD and all that stuff, I didn't connect those dots. And so I messed with it for a little while, and almost as soon as I got into it, I got out of it. And I'm a pack rat. So I disassembled the computer and I put it in a box with all the other hard drives from all the other computers that I disassembled. And it sat in my shed for approximately 13 years. And then in late 23, my life falls apart. My mom gets really sick. I have to move out to take care of her. And I'm, poor and she's got nobody. I'm an only child. So I make that choice. And because I make that choice, I lose my jobs. I lose my girlfriend. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. Can't really do much. And life is not looking so good for me. Um, and also my grandpa dies around the same time, and it was unfortunate, but the silver lining was, he left me some money in an estate, and it was enough money that I needed to do something with it. So I started doing my due diligence. I thought, what do I get? Do I get stocks or bonds or real estate or gold or ammunition or what do I do? And, and then I have this little nagging thought, maybe I get some Bitcoin. Because I'm paying attention to the news. I know about it. I just didn't remember that I had any. I didn't identify as a Bitcoiner. And then almost as soon as I had that thought, I remember I was like, wait, I did this a long time ago. And then the wheels start turning. I think, wait, I may have kept that drive, but there's no way. If it's out there, it's corrupted, it's busted up. Even if I find it, it's going to go wrong. I'll probably lose it. This is not my life. I am not that lucky, but it's too much. I can't not check because I actually did remember how much Bitcoin was on the drive. So I was like, I'll never be able to sleep again if I don't check. So I end up in my shed and find the box of hard drives. And long story short, about 8 months later, I'm at the Porcupine Festival, which is a libertarian festival in New Hampshire. It's been going on for 20 some years. They've been there for 30 years. And while I'm there, there's a guy named Joshua Groth who is founding a company called Nova Sapien, and he's doing a self custody workshop. I read the thing about on the schedule about him, and he's this really cool adventure guy. He's a skydiver and a base jumper and a paraglider, and he's got this like amazing life. And I honestly wasn't that interested in the Bitcoin part of it, but he was like a really cool guy. So I was like, okay, this seems like the thing for me. In the self custody workshop, he talks about seed signer and proper self custody and this kit that he's putting together. And then he makes an offhand remark in the workshop about how he had helped somebody recover their Bitcoin. And I could tell just by looking at him, seeing him talk, that he was a man of integrity, and he wasn't gonna kill me and run off to Mexico or something. So so I went up to him. I said, "Hey man, could you? I might have some. All I do is I've got this drive, and it's got Ubuntu on it, and it matches the manufacturing date. I didn't really know much else at that point, and so he says, yeah, if I fly out to Boulder, Colorado, he'd help me get it. And cut to about 3 weeks later, and in his basement with a team of three other people, one of which is Hunter Beast, who goes by Crypto Quick on X. We recover the Bitcoin, and then I go from broken, alone, and in poverty to being financially stable for the rest of my life.
That's so cool. I can't imagine. Was it It's almost like, I can't imagine, like, winning the lottery type thing, and not only did you, like, win the lottery, but it was like you won, like, the best kind of money in the lottery, and then you realize that you're, financially stable for the rest of your life. How did that feel when you first were you even, like, hopeful when you were talking to them, like, "Hey, we might be able to recover this, like, let's give it a try." Were you like, "Nah"? Like, how was that?
I was not in a positive headspace at that particular point. I was really there because I knew that I just had to do it. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't at least try. And up to the very end, before they pushed the button, I didn't believe that it was going to happen. And even after it happened, I was still reeling for months and just checking the price over and over again.
So since you You said you found they've this was in like 2024 ish or
Yeah.
2023.
Yeah, it was almost exactly 14 years.
Okay. So then since then, did you like have you gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole even further? Because you said you weren't really like that much into it, but how is your life, physically, mentally, how has it changed since then?
Good question. So I was very fortunate in that when I found he, Joshua Groth, he gave me a week-long workshop in how to do self-custody properly. So while we're recovering the Bitcoin and doing everything for that, he's also teaching me about self-custody, teaching me about proper security practices and operational security and everything that I would need to know, including orange pilling me and telling me about why Bitcoin is, the thing that I should want. And by the end of it, I I don't sell. I just dump everything else that I have into Bitcoin. So um, within a month after that, I'm 99.9% allocated, and I still am completely allocated to Bitcoin to this day.
Now, I mean, so you're 99% allocated. You haven't sold anything?
I don't want to get too deep into that. I have, I'm looking at some other options. I'm looking at Stretch and I'm looking at Strike and some other things personally. Because while Bitcoin is great, doesn't generate a lot of cash flow. Well, it doesn't generate any cash flow, and is that's something I'm currently noodling through, trying to figure out how I'm gonna do that. There's also I could get a job, but I don't know.
Nah. No, that's so cool. I mean, I don't know what I would do. You don't have to I'm gonna ask it. Is there a price point where you would be like, I'm selling like half this. I'm gonna keep the other half, for my legacy, but I'm selling half this because we hit 500K or something. It's like some crazy number. Everyone's got a number that they would, it's life changing. Like you need money to live. You can't live off your Bitcoin yet. We're not to that point. So, is there a number?
um. So yeah, I would say that there is a number. I'm not exactly sure what that number is. The the thing is, I'll just say this. Um, I look at Bitcoin as money, right? And the question really is, what do you sell Bitcoin for? And comparatively, there's nothing compared to Bitcoin that's worth selling it for. And and so if unless you have cash flow issues, then I think the answer should be no. And you can live on a Bitcoin standard. So I have been using the strike method, or I'm sorry, the Mahler's method, which is basically living on credit cards and then paying off my credit cards with my Bitcoin stack. So I basically can live on the Bitcoin. I'm still using fiat directly, but in the back end, it's all Bitcoin.
Okay, no, that makes sense, and I get it. I personally think, like, in my own head, I think if I had a certain amount, like, I go through this too, um, where every time I'm investing in something, and I'm like, why would I buy anything else? Because I like big nothing compares to Bitcoin. So like why would I sell Bitcoin? Because I don't want to buy anything else either. But at the same time, I'm like, well, yeah, having a decent house with a yard and some farm animals and a nice car, like that sounds kind of nice sometimes. So I just thought I would ask to see if you would.
No, that's good. I'm a utilitarian, so I think if you're going to buy things because they have utility for you to make your life better as an individual or for your family, that's a totally separate category of things than buying 5 Lambos that you don't need, just to make yourself feel better. So it really just it depends on why you're doing it. And I think that a lot of people in the space have made the point that there's a lot of misallocation of wealth because of inflation. And so people buy houses they don't need, they buy cars they don't need. In fact, because of inflation, we're driven to spend our money as quickly as possible because we know that the money will be worth less in the future. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's the opposite. So we have the opposite problem, which is to say we're driven to save as much of it as possible. And then it basically flips your whole paradigm for how you think about money, how you think about savings, something that we used to do well in society. We used to save, but since we have inflation, that's something that has been lost.
Yeah. No, I agree. I do think that if you sell Bitcoin to improve your life or your family's life, like, I mean, I don't see a problem with that. When people say never sell your Bitcoin, I'm like, dude, if it's a life changing amount and someone sells, like, I who am I to say? Like, that's the joys of Bitcoin, right? Is it's like the freedom, the sovereignty aspect. So telling people what to do with their Bitcoin is kind of like, hypocritical.
I'll point
So
out also a lot of the OGs, they don't look at Bitcoin the same way that average Bitcoin holders do. They look at it like a cash flow asset, and they use it that way. So there's a total difference between how average people look at it and how like Bitcoin holders who are whales and have a ton of Bitcoin, how they look at it.
really,
Uh,
dive deeper into that. What do you mean, like, the Bitcoin whales use it purely for capital gain, like, just gaining money?
Obviously, I can't speak for all Bitcoin OGs because
Sure.
there's not like
Yeah.
a cohesive group of OGs, but Um, I think that if you have a lot of Bitcoin, you'll have expenses. You'll need cash flow. And so you're going to sell it to invest in things that will generate cash flow because capital gains is nice, but you can't eat Bitcoin and you can't live in Bitcoin. You still have, like we were just saying, you have to translate it into real world things for you and your family. So that's really just what it boils down to.
Okay. But then, so I asked you earlier, and I kind of wanted to touch on it again. Because mentally, you said you were in a really bad place, and financially in a bad place. Mom was sick, just had another death in the family. Sorry, did you say that was your grandfather?
Yeah.
Okay. So now that you have this Bitcoin, life's changed. Where's your mentality at now? Is it a brighter future outlook right now?
Well, I've got a lot more Lambos now. I'm kidding. Totally kidding. So I actually didn't change my spending habits that much. I was fortunate in that I recovered the Bitcoin like in my late 30s. So, if I had recovered it in my mid or late 20s, I'd probably have a very different answer because my time preferences were very different as someone in my 20s and now. So, I'm thinking about my potential future children and my potential future family and what they're going to have and what they're going to need, not thinking about myself. Whereas in my 20s, I was, consumed with my own desires, as many 20-year-olds are. So it's just a totally different mentality. I'd say my outlook has definitely changed. It has lengthened my time horizons. I between the Bitcoin, because I'm also a full stack developer. So between the Bitcoin and AI, I'm actually just really excited about the future, not just for myself, but for humanity in general. I think a lot of really incredible things are just right around the corner with whether it comes to like robotics or medical breakthroughs or, you know, going to Mars or whatever it is, like there's just a lot of incredible things. And I used to be sort of black pilled and pessimistic about the future, and I still can be somewhat cynical, but I have a lot more optimism and a lot more hope knowing that Bitcoin is there and that AI is there to, drive the society and the civilization forward.
Okay. I do actually want to ask you about that, the future and AI and stuff like that. So since we mentioned it, do you mind telling people, what you do now and then how, you know, how that translates to how you view things like AI, robotics?
Sure. So I'll just speak from my personal experience. So when I got into Bitcoin again, I went out there to look for treasury software to manage my stack. And I found that with some exception, most of the software was either had shitcoinery in it, sorry,
No, 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 you're fine.
or or but it didn't respect my privacy. Otherwise, it required KYC. It required me to have, to basically give out all of my transactions and for other people to have complete transparency into what I'm doing financially. And I'm thinking, well, I've got enough runway, so I'll just vibe code something. So I start developing self-hosted, privacy-respecting Bitcoin treasury software. Really, mostly for me, just dogfooding myself, thinking about the kind of issues that I've got, and then that comes along pretty quickly, actually. So I know for a fact that the scope and size of that project would have taken years to do by myself before AI, and then after I'm able to put it together in weeks or months with the same degree of quality, if not better. So I start thinking like, well, this is a horizontal layer that's going to improve everything, and why not? Why wouldn't it improve Bitcoin too? So I apply that to Bitcoin and I start thinking about the governance of Bitcoin. And in that process, I'm I basically come to the conclusion that uh, Bitcoin itself, the code base, will probably also be affected by this new development of AI, for better or for worse. And so my question was, well, we have these principles in the technical consensus layer, permissionless access, and it solves this Byzantine generals problem and no counterparty risk. And Bitcoin's actual code solves so many issues, but the code base, the the repository, the people in charge of that repository, they stand in stark contrast to the technical consensus layer that they're governing, which is to say that this one thing is completely decentralized and this other thing is completely centralized. And to my mind, is that's a contradiction. And so I think I'll give the Bitcoin developers grace. They aren't social scientists. They didn't think about organizational dynamics. They used the best tools that they had at the time to put together this code, and they did a really great job. And I'm very thankful to them, by the way, for that, for obvious reasons. But in the same token, we've got AI, we've got the development velocity for a very small team to devise a solution to this problem very inexpensively. It was possible before, but there wasn't the will, there wasn't the funding, and so it just didn't happen. And so basically, to make a long story short, I put together an alternative Bitcoin node and an alternative commons governance model to govern that node. And then I did a governance analysis of Bitcoin Core's public data for the last 16 years, because I suspected that there was an oligarchy, or at least a very high concentration of power. And so I didn't want to just go out and say that. I wanted to be able to prove it. And so that's what that governance analysis was for. So I feel like I've proven that there is this concentration of power. And instead of just going out and complaining about it, I am providing a solution, an alternative, which may or may not get traction. That's not really what it's about. It's essentially to prove that an alternative is possible, that we can do this better. None of that would have materialized, especially in the very short period of time that it did, without AI. Personally, I have seen 400 to 500x improvement in my personal development velocity. I was able to put that Bitcoin node together in a matter of months, which should have taken a decade.
Okay, so when you say we can do this better, what do you mean? We can do this better. Like, are you talking?
The governance of the repository. In other words, I think that the technical consensus layer is solved. I don't have any um, prescriptions for consensus. So I'm not saying, oh, we need to change the block size or do this, that, or the other thing. I'm just simply saying that we need to consistently apply the principles inherent in the technical consensus layer to the governance of the code that defines what that layer is.
Okay,
So,
you lost me
okay.
there.
Okay. So currently there are 5 or 6 people who have merge access, right? And
Okay.
so one person can press the merge button on the code, and then that code goes into a release. Now, this is oversimplified. There's signatures, and let's assume that that did happen. It would be caught. It would be reverted. So that it's not. I'm not saying that there's like this existential threat that some maintainer is going to get compromised and someone's going to push that merge button, and then suddenly there'll be a Bitcoin version that breaks Bitcoin. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the fact that that is an option, the fact that any one person can press that button without needing multiple confirmations from other maintainers, just like transactions need multiple confirmations, that is an inconsistency. So I would see, I am advocating for the distribution of merge access, doing something called a multi-sig merge. Um,
Can you dive what's a multi-sig merge?
Okay, so a multi-sig merge is essentially just what I said. It's just this idea that no one person has merge access. In order to merge code, you have to get multiple people to sign off on it. And not just as a matter of social convention, but as a technical limitation, meaning that if one person does press that merge button, it is automatically reverted, it's automatically prevented, rather than I mean, if it happens at like 3 a.m. and nobody's awake and like all sorts of things happen, and like the technical consensus layer, the the social coordination layer should have, in my view, similar safeguards. And also, generally speaking, I think we should treat the code base as if it's a commons. It's a resource that we all benefit from, but nobody controls. And currently, I would argue that there's a very small group of maintainers that do control that commons, and that is inconsistent with like I said, the principles inherent in the technical consensus layer that it's meant to govern. And so at this point, usually I go back to 2014 when Gavin Andreessen does a talk at Princeton where he advocates for multiple implementations in order to have 99% confidence that there won't be a horrible bug. And that confidence threshold is never met. And I'll point out, by the way, Gavin Andreessen, for whatever his issues are or were, he was and probably still is a brilliant engineer. And he was responsible for refactoring a lot of Satoshi's code. And so the fact that he, as Satoshi's handpicked successor, who was responsible for refactoring a lot of this code in 2014, calls for alternative implementations to have a 99% certainty that there won't be a horrible bug, and then that confidence threshold is never met, that to me is a big problem. And I will point out also, by the way, in 2018, the inflation bug is discovered after all of the institutional effort is consumed by the block size wars for years. And there's this bug looming there the whole time. Now, had we had alternative implementations as he had called for, then that inflation bug, assuming it hadn't been reported properly, thankfully it was, would have affected everybody. So if you have alternatives, then say, let's hypothetically say that 20% of the network is on some other version of Bitcoin, then that bug is confined to just the people who are running core. So it doesn't necessarily destroy the network. And then of course recently we have this wallet deletion bug that managed to pass review. That pull request was being reviewed for 2 years. It had 98 reviews, and nobody saw the wallet deletion bug. And then a subsequent PR made this bug possible, enabled this bug. And so there's sort of this mentality, oh, well, Bitcoin developers are really smart and there's all this review, and there's no way you could get a bug through this extensive review process, except it did. It has. There have been multiple instances where this has occurred. So again, we need other people, other groups, other companies to have to deploy actual implement alternatives that are robust, not simply forks of core. Like Knots is 96, 95% core code. So the risks are still there. And essentially, my contention is that we need real alternatives like libBitcoin and Commons and Echo and some of these others. And we need real adoption of these alternatives because that secures the network.
Okay. I have a couple questions. I guess first, so you're saying there's like only about 6 people that kind of are like the core devs, is that like control this?
They have merge access. Basically, they are the final say so. So you basically, let's say you have a choice, or rather you have a change that you want to introduce to the code base. Well, first of all, it's a monolithic code base. So it's 350,000 lines of code roughly, and it's an all or nothing proposition. So if you want to change one line of code, it all goes together or it doesn't go at all. In order to do that, you have to either get the agreement of the 6 people who have merge access, or you have a civil war on your hands. And most Bitcoiners, I think, who've been around for a while know that there's just been one civil war after the other in Bitcoin over this thing or that thing. And my contention is that because of the nature of the code base, it being a monolith and us having to go through these maintainers to make any changes, and there being no alternatives, that essentially there will just be an inevitable and increasingly escalating number of civil wars. And by the end of it, nothing kills Bitcoin. I'm not saying there's an existential threat to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to be just fine, but we're not going to like it anymore. We're not going to be happy about it. We're pretty much going to be like pretty unhappy and upset because there'll just be constant controversy. And I think we're seeing that now with Core v Knots. I think we've seen that before with the block size wars and other things. And the block size wars, for anybody who was around back then, and I wasn't really around, but I've sort of looked back into the historical record. I think most of the people who were around back then, they understood that it was like a very traumatic incident. There's a lot of PTSD in the community about that. People don't even want to have the governance discussion because it was overshadowed by this block size discussion. And a lot of people conflate these two things together. So essentially what I'm saying is let's have this governance discussion when we're not in the middle of a big civil war, because the next time we have some major issue with consensus, there's going to be a lot more money on the line and there's going to be a lot more people involved. And so it's just going to be that much worse. And like I said, because of the nature of the code base and the lack of alternatives, it's inevitable. There's no getting around it until we as a community concentrate around something other than Bitcoin Core or a code base that is mostly Bitcoin Core.
So is this pretty much what you're doing right now, is you're trying to advocate for this? And then how do you have a solution for it?
Yeah. So I'm a fan of libBitcoin. I support libBitcoin and their efforts to create an alternative node. It's modular. I don't think they're addressing the governance discussion, which to my mind is critical. So I don't want to just have a bunch of thrones and then move the thrones from Bitcoin Core over to some other implementation. I want to see the throne abolished. So I don't think there should be kings in Bitcoin who have special privileges over anybody else. And so I think in order to do that, we need to come up with a governance solution that is unique to Bitcoin. And I'm calling it Commons. So as opposed to Core, it's Commons. And essentially Commons distributes the authority. It's very transparent. The rules are set in stone. It's a very forkable infrastructure, meaning that it's modular and each thing can be governed separately. So it's not an all or nothing proposition. If you want to make changes to it, you can just change that little bit that you want to change without touching the rest of the code base, which makes it a lot easier to have diversity, not only in implementation, but also with different modules. So yes, I'm basically building that and advocating for that. Again, I don't know if it'll work out, but it'll at least prove to people that there is a different way of doing this. And also, I'll point out that during the block size wars and at other points in Bitcoin history, there have been people who have um, presented alternative governance models, and they usually make a number of mistakes. One is they fork the network, so they want to change consensus in some way. I'm not advocating for any change to consensus. I want to see consensus defined very clearly and ossified. And I think that's about 10 to 15% of the code base. And then all the rest of it, which isn't consensus, there's a lot of room for innovation there. And that innovation currently isn't happening. There's 15 years, 16 years of technical debt that has accumulated, which, again, is not an existential threat to Bitcoin, but we're looking at CBDCs, digital tokens, and all this other stuff coming on board. The bankers could onboard $2 trillion. They could onboard the entire market cap of Bitcoin in 6 months into some CBDC if they wanted to. They've already got all the customers. They've got, control over the media channels and so forth. So, Bitcoin, I don't think Bitcoin can afford to remain stagnant. The status quo is dangerous if we want to see Bitcoin become a medium of exchange and a unit of account. Right now, it's a great store of value, but it's not a great medium of exchange or unit of account. In fact, people are using Lightning, and Lightning is great. I don't have any issue with Lightning, but it's not Bitcoin. And these are things that Bitcoin should be able to do, having better throughput and being able to handle smaller transactions. And this would technically be possible if it, in my mind, if it weren't for the governance paralysis. The other thing I'll point out, then I'll stop, is the other people who have had this discussion, they typically don't have mental models that are appropriate for Bitcoin. So Mike Hearn famously declared Bitcoin dead after the block size wars, or during the block size wars, and he was advocating for a top-down corporate type of model. And if you look at all of the major open source projects of similar scope and size to Bitcoin, they all have top-down corporate models. And that is completely inappropriate for Bitcoin. Currently, we still have that. It's just informal. So basically, it is a top-down model where the maintainers have special privileges at the top. They just deny it. They're just like, it's not happening, even though it's very real.
Okay, I have two more questions about this. So first, are you looking at potentially like changing the base layer of Bitcoin, if that's even correct? But then also, what's the biggest threat to Bitcoin right now then?
So yes. So my first question was, what is consensus? That was the first thing I asked. And if you asked a serious Bitcoin developer, they would tell you that consensus is embedded in 350,000 lines of code, and it's sort of entangled in all the C++. And you have to be a master of 8 different disciplines in order to reliably do anything with that code. And I would argue that there basically isn't anybody on planet Earth who is competent enough to do that. And if there was, we certainly are not going to be able to afford them with the bare bones budget that Bitcoin currently operates on. So that's a major issue. So in trying to solve that, I basically went to AI and I said, let's clone core, look at all this code, extract from all of this code, what is consensus? And so it came up with a mathematical proof of consensus. And instead of forking Bitcoin Core, I built an implementation on top of the mathematical proof. So it's a completely separate implementation built on a mathematical proof of consensus. That the math is pretty small. Like it's not a very big proof. It's like 1,600 lines or so. It's there isn't much there. And so in defining consensus and locking the implementation to that mathematical proof, we can uh, expose Bitcoin to mathematicians. So there's 200, 300 million mathematicians worldwide who don't know C++, they don't know distributed systems, they don't know cryptography, they don't know a whole bunch of stuff, but they might be useful to look at consensus. And currently they can't without knowing all those other things. So by separating the consensus rules and making them mathematically pure, we now have potentially hundreds of millions of more eyes on Bitcoin. And that's what I want to see, because Linus's law says that more eyes equals more security, essentially. And if we want this, I mean, Bitcoin is security critical software. So we want as many eyes on it as possible.
Okay. No, I agree. And I also, I mean, a lot of this stuff is like, it's way over my head. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to sit there and look at code and be like, this is what we should implement. That's way over my head. That's why I like to ask you guys. Uh, but it's fascinating to learn about. But then, so what, is that the biggest threat to Bitcoin right now then?
In my mind, Bitcoin will be fine. There's no existential threat to Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't going to collapse. It isn't going to go to zero. I think the trend line is pretty clear. Bitcoin is a great store of value. It's a global settlement layer. The real question is, with the central banks looking at digital tokens, looking at CBDCs, with the fact that they already have all the customers and they can onboard the whole market cap of Bitcoin in 6 months to whatever token they want, the existential threat isn't to Bitcoin, but it's to all of those people who need Bitcoin, but won't hear about it, or they'll be persuaded away from it because they hear about, there's, oh, well, better utility or better this or better that. The governance paralysis means that a lot of improvements that should be happening in Bitcoin aren't happening. And I could point to a lot of examples of that. The sort of easiest one is the fact that the wallet and the node are in the same code base. And they've been trying to separate the node and the wallet. And this is, like, from a software development perspective, this is just basic separation of concerns. And any software developer would tell you they shouldn't be in the same code base. They should be separated, but this is an architectural thing that everyone agrees on, has agreed on, and they've been working on for 12 years, yet they still can't get it done. And my argument is essentially that's because of the concentration of power and the governance paralysis. And as long as we have that paralysis, leaving this wide open door for stable coins and others to fill that gap. And I don't want to see that happen. I want to see Bitcoin be not only the store of value, but the medium of exchange and the unit of account. I think that will happen eventually, but the question is, will it be in a 5, 10, or 50 or 100-year time horizon? If the status quo continues, it'll be a long, long time before the promise of Bitcoin is realized.
Okay. To kind of take where you were going with that, but also I kind of want to go down this rabbit hole of, banks and CBDCs, things like that. What are your thoughts on I know you're in the strategy headquarters, which is awesome. And what are your thoughts on products like Strive, Strike, MSTR, the ETFs, things like that? That um in my own opinion, I think they're great products. They're not Bitcoin, but I think they're great products. And I am scared of the same thing that you just mentioned, people vilifying Bitcoin to convince other people to come to their CBDC, which we already can see the headlines, right? We already know what they're going to do. And so with that, what are your thoughts on those things?
Well, okay. So nothing compares to Bitcoin and self-custody. Just period. So that I'll just start there so all the maxis don't start throwing tomatoes at me. But that said, we have to deal with the world that we have, not the one that we want. And so, perhaps the consistent application of principles over the generations will lead to our anarcho-capitalist utopia and everyone will live happily ever after. And that's nice. And I hope that that happens, but that is going to be, it's a multi-generational issue. It's going to be a while before that happens. So we just have to deal with the world that we have. Like Sailor is doing incredible work to bring Bitcoin to the existing financial system and to the government. And uh, I support that. I think we have to incrementally build parallel systems, and this is how we do it. So it may not be perfect, but nothing ever is. So
Yeah.
we just do the best we can.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm super excited. I mean, just seeing the past couple years has watching Bitcoin grow has been phenomenal.
And to be clear, I don't work for Strategy. I'm
Oh,
completely independent, but I am here at the Strategy Hub Studio, which is a free co-working space in Northern Virginia in their headquarters. And I'm a founding member of the hub, along with about 30 other people who are here, all entrepreneurs in the Bitcoin space, all building various products or working for Bitcoin companies. And we all collaborate and try to move the needle forward in various ways.
that's awesome, man. Um, no, Josh, I appreciate you. One or two more questions for you. What are you looking forward to in 2026? What are you looking forward to the most? You don't have to talk about price or anything. If you want to, you can give a price prediction. Sometimes I like to, it's kind of fun to throw it out there, but are you bullish? Are you bearish? Does it not matter for you? Are you just kind of, what are you looking forward to?
I am definitely bullish. I think the 4-year cycle is broken. I think we're probably going to get all-time highs this year. Um, I, there's a lot that could happen, but I'm optimistic for Bitcoin. Not much else.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. No, Josh, I appreciate you coming on. It's been fun, and
Yeah.
once I mean, I'd love to do this again, and I want like my a little bit more experience in learning about what you're talking about so I can ask deeper questions on those topics. Because a lot of what you said, I mean, I people are gonna understand, some people are gonna understand it, some people aren't, and I'm like kind of right there in the middle where like some of it I was like, yeah, I get that, and then other parts I was like, I don't get that. And so I appreciate you coming on and explaining it pretty simply, and I enjoyed it. And then, like I said, maybe in the future we can do this again, and we'll see where things are at in terms of core v knots and the consensus that you were talking about, and the immigration and all that stuff. So, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. I would absolutely love to have more discussions with you about any of this stuff. Obviously, Bitcoin is a very big subject. There's a lot to talk about. The rabbit hole is just endless. So I was at a little bit of an advantage having a software development background and cybersecurity background and worked with distributed systems and all this other stuff prior to sort of rediscovering Bitcoin. So, I've spent a lot of time in free and open source software development, 20 plus years of experience. And I'm doing my best to try and bring it to a level of interpretation where average people can understand what I'm talking about, because generally the sort of prevailing wind is, well, if you don't like it, you don't have to update, or, the maintainers don't control it because you can just run whatever your version you want, or, there's a lot of arguments that people make that are somewhat true, but in the final equation don't really hold water. And I'm just trying. The main issue for me is when I got to this space, I saw the Corby Knots debate, and I understand that spam is an issue on Bitcoin. I don't know, a significant percentage of the blockchain is arguably spam. And currently, the initial blockchain download is something that everybody has to do if they want to run a full node. And basically, I have to participate in all monkey JPEGs, whether I like it or not. And that is, again, downstream of the governance paralysis. There are solutions to this problem, which aren't filters, by the way, that have been in researched and proposed from basically the very beginning that haven't occurred, that haven't made it into the code base. So, you know, at the end of the day, my main goal is to expand the Overton window and get people to get off the spam debate, which isn't to say that it's not an important debate, but to say that there is an underlying governance crisis, and that if we resolve that crisis, then we wouldn't even be having this spam debate. And that's going to continue on from one crisis to the next. And I'd like to, like I said before, have this governance discussion right now when we're having a sort of small crisis rather than in the middle of the next big one.
That's fair enough. And I agree. I definitely agree with it. Um, awesome, Josh. Well, thank you so
Well,
much. That's
thanks.
a great place to end it. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Follow Josh on X. That's where I got to know him. And I'll put his handle down in the description below. And share this with your other Bitcoin fellow friends. And thank you for tuning in to the Bitcoin broadcast. I'm your host, Vince, and this has been a great time. We'll see you next time. Peace.